Yeah, no, it's goodbye from Flight 2. We're all set, stand by.
That breaking news out of the UK, a soldier has apparently been murdered in southeast London.
Attacked the soldier with a...
Witnesses report the most horrific of attacks.
The only reason we have killed this man today is because Muslims are dying daily by British soldiers. And this British soldier is an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth.
It was a killing that stunned a nation. An off-duty soldier run down and stabbed by two men on the streets of London, one of whom invites passers-by to film him.
Leave our land and you live in peace, that's all I have to say. I mean, Allah's peace and blessings be upon Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam.
I thought he was mad. You know, somebody who could kill cold-blooded murder on the street of London.
You people will never be safe.
I think my instant human reaction was disgust, shock, horror, just like anybody else. It's like, gosh, is that really happening?
It was just from a horror movie that this man could do something like that, and in the name of Islam.
That man was Michael Adebolajo. His actions were condemned by the overwhelming majority of British Muslims as criminal and barbarous. Al Jazeera has spoken exclusively to his brother, who provides an inside perspective on why Adebolajo killed a man he'd never met on a London street. Jeremiah Adebolajo does not want to show his face due to concerns about his safety.
So you can all live in peace.
It would be a mistake to consider that he's just, a mad fanatic who's put no real thought into his actions. He's very aware of how poignant it would be to have somebody do this and then speak in a British accent about foreign policy.
Al Jazeera investigates why a man born and brought up in Britain tried to justify killing a British soldier in the name of a global war. Lee Rigby, a 25-year-old drummer and machine gunner in the British Army, seen here in Afghanistan, was knocked down by a vehicle driven by Michael Adebolajo as he approached Woolwich barracks. Adebolajo and his accomplice Michael Adebowale then dragged his unconscious body to the middle of the street and hacked him to death. They chose Lee Rigby simply because he was a soldier.
During the trial, Adebolajo and his lawyers argued that Britain's involvement in Afghanistan means the country is currently in a state of war, and as such, the killing of a soldier was not murder, but an act of war. Now, the argument was rejected by the jury, but it raises the spectre of an uncomfortable debate about the West's counter-terrorism strategy since 9/11 and the impact it had on Adebolajo's actions.
Michael Adebolajo and his brother were born to Nigerian parents in Romford on the outskirts of London.
It was a pretty Christian upbringing. We went to church every Sunday. He wasn't a perfect boy. He certainly did have a temper. He was involved with some gangs when he was younger. I think most boys of that age are. That was really the extent of it. There was nothing major, there was no major crimes, he wasn't a drug baron.
Despite the reservations of his family, Adebolajo converted to Islam.
He was always a very religious guy, and to the family at least, it was something secretive. He used a lot of his youth from 15 up until the age of 18, learning about Islam, reading about Islam, and eventually teaching myself and other members of my family about Islam.
While his parents remain Christians, Jeremiah is now also a devout Muslim.
Bismillah, alhamdulillah.
He requested that he begin his interview with a prayer.
Wa ala alihi wa ashabihi wa sallam. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatan min lisani wafqahu qawli. The first time I saw my brother's face on the screen, I was quite shocked. But then I saw the video.
Muslims are dying daily by British soldiers, and this British soldier is an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth.
The events, to me, were inevitable, and there was eventually going to be another attack which mentioned foreign policy as its justification.
Similar declarations were made by Mohammed Sadiq Khan, the planner of the July 2005 London bombings.
Until you stop the bombing, gassing, imprisonment and torture of my people, we will not stop this fight. We are at war and I'm a soldier. Now you too will taste the reality of this situation.
When Glasgow Airport was attacked 2 years later, Bilal Abdullah said his motivation was anger at Britain's foreign policy.
There's a certain blindness that pervades the current thinking within government about how terrorism and the phenomenon of terrorism should be understood. Dr. Bilal Abdullah specifically states that I wanted you to feel a little part of what Iraqis feel. Mohammed Sadiq Khan specifically states that the reason he carried out their attacks against British targets was because of British foreign policy. Adebolajo, again, exactly the same thing.
When you drop a bomb, do you think it picks one person, or rather your bomb wipes out a whole family? This is the reality.
In response to the 7/7 bombings, the government spent millions of pounds developing an anti-terrorism programme called Prevent. It tries to address the concerns that many Muslims share about Britain's foreign policy by providing a counter-narrative to Al-Qaeda, emphasising that an attack on British soil can never be justified by religious edicts. Imam Irfan Chisti runs classes for Muslims in Rochdale in northern England. His centre has received funding from the Prevent programme. Today's subject, the killing of Lee Rigby.
That image there, a gentleman, literally with blood on his hands, meat cleaver, there's people in the background, there's a bus, Just get as many...
He teaches that Muslims in the UK live under a covenant of security with the British state, which obliges them to respect British law.
Keep your promises.
He's a British citizen that has an oath to live peaceably in this land and to live in accordance with the rules and the law of this land. And his being in the UK as a British citizen is very significant because he's breaking the covenant. There isn't any justification for him personally to take up arms. He might say that, well, this is a specific soldier who's killed a specific Muslim and I'm taking vengeance. We aren't in the position of, vigilantism. That's not Islam. Islam is a system of law and governance, justice, and that's what needs to be played out.
Shortly after converting, Adebolajo met the cleric Omar Bakri Mohammed and attended meetings of his radical movement Al-Muhajirun. One protest in 2006 led to his arrest for assaulting a police officer. A year later, after the group was banned and Omar Bakri expelled from Britain, he joined another march organised by one of the group's offshoots, now under the leadership of Anjem Chowdhury.
We will not stop raising our voices for our brothers and sisters.
He did attend a few demos. He was invited, like so many other Muslims, to attend rallies and talks, which he did. He attended a few.
Adebolajo also led some of the protests. Despite this association, Jeremiah insists that his brother was not radicalised by anyone.
It's a very tidy narrative to assume that we have this young Christian boy who was radicalised by these bogeymen-like figures, Anjem Chowdhury, Omar Bakri Mohammed, and well, he went on this conveyor belt, as it were, of radicalisation, and then the events of Woolwich happened. It's just not true.
According to his brother, Adebolajo began to read extensively. He formed his own understanding of concepts such as jihad and the duty to help the ummah, or family of Muslims around the world.
The idea that a Muslim is to suffer, whether it be in Somalia or Syria or Iraq or in Britain, is something abhorrent to another Muslim, and that he should concern himself with relieving his fellow Muslims of any suffering they're enduring.
By 2010, Adebolajo's interpretation of his religion led him to leave the UK. He travelled to Mombasa in Kenya and onto the border with Somalia. He wanted to reach the areas controlled by the armed Islamist movement Al-Shabaab.
He wanted to live in Islamic society, he wanted to learn from Muslims, and he didn't want to be stuck in a country that labels practicing Muslims or Muslims who wish to live under the Sharia as terrorists.
Al-Shabaab emerged from the remnants of a Sharia-based government that was overthrown with American help in 2006. It led to a conflict that attracted Muslim fighters from around the world. I travelled to Mombasa to see a controversial cleric who's met many young men like Adebolajo who wanted to travel to Somalia.
The more you oppress Muslims, the more you kill Muslims, the more they are inclined to jihad. Like a scholar said, jihad is like a tree, and the water that makes that tree grow is blood.
Makaburi believes that the response of the West to the attacks of September the 11th radicalized a new generation of Muslims.
They've discovered their own religion by the invasion of the Western countries, in Islamic countries. I was just a Muslim, a normal Muslim, a moderate Muslim. The one who made me the way I am was George W. Bush.
These enemies view the entire world as a battlefield, and we must pursue them wherever they are.
After the attack on the Twin Towers, the traditional rules of war seemed to no longer apply. The West declared its war on terror and redefined the battlefield as anywhere they found men they considered terrorists.
Let no one be in any doubt. The rules of the game are changing.
We're smoking them out, they're running, and now we're going to bring them to justice.
This global battlefield is central to Adebolajo's defense that a soldier who has fought in Muslim lands can be a target wherever they are.
The point he's trying to make is the fact that the geographical location of the battlefield since this war on terror has basically disappeared. When we have bombs falling on villages, from unmanned drones, when we have people driving on roads in Afghanistan and targeted by drones, we have to ask ourselves the question, are these people soldiers? Is this a battlefield?
America started with this war on terror, this conflict without jurisdictional boundaries, without any rules or regulations, that basically says that the law doesn't matter anymore. And so they said to themselves, well, you know, they've expanded the laws of armed conflict and the use of force in relation to Muslims around the world. So what is the harm in us doing the same thing as well?
The man who led British forces in Afghanistan and advised the government on intelligence issues believes the West's actions are born out of necessity.
We can't simply sit back at home and wait for them to come and attack us. We can't wait for them to carry out shoe bomb attacks and the various other forms of attacks that have emanated from countries like Yemen and countries like Somalia and Pakistan. We have to go out and we have to find them wherever they are, and we have to then attack them themselves before they can carry out attacks against us.
People are going to say that, well, he is a violent individual, and he proved that on the day of Woolwich. But I would say, was Lee Rigby a violent individual? Are other British soldiers who go to Afghanistan and Iraq and kill violent individuals?
Immediately before the invasion of Iraq, up to 1 million people, including British Muslims, protested in vain against the war. The presence of British soldiers in Afghanistan and Iraq forced some Muslim scholars to examine whether those living under occupation were entitled to fight back. The right to self-defense is recognized under the UN Charter and established within the Quran as a defensive jihad. but established scholars in Britain say that an attack here can never be justified.
The vast majority of the scholars, have said that it's not permissible to kill civilians within the UK. So I think across the board, there was a recognition of that fact. The question is now, does Lee Rigby, count as somebody who's fought in Afghanistan as being a civilian?
In a jihad situation, what can you remember about the actual rules of jihad? Can you do what this chap has just done? Pick up a cleaver and say, right, I'm gonna... When can you physically take up an arm, a weapon, and kill? You need to be in a war situation, a warring situation. The war needs to have been instigated by a Muslim leadership or a country or a government, and it needs to be a battlefield, so a war on, soldier upon soldier.
There is no accepted ruling authority to make these declarations, and some radical Muslims have adopted the logic of a borderless conflict.
It's not a war on terror, it's a war on Islam. And the people who are fighting Islam all over the world, the British soldier was one of them. He's fighting Islam. What if he's sent to Afghanistan? Do you want to tell me that if he's given an order to bomb a civilian area, he'll refuse? He'll kill. So it's a war on Islam. Abulaji was a Muslim. He did his duty as a Muslim. That's what I believe.
Most young British Muslims certainly understand the grievances he was speaking about in the video. As to justifiable, this is a question for the scholars, and I think it's obvious to most people.
Adebolajo's trip to Kenya started another chapter in his life, not under Sharia as he had hoped, but one involving regular contact with the British security services. He was caught by the Kenyan authorities as he tried to cross into Somalia and arrested on suspicion of trying to join al-Shabaab. He told Jeremiah that while in jail he was physically abused by Kenyan police and that the British authorities knew it was happening.
These people, they are mistreating us and we are innocent, believe me.
He's fully aware that the British knew he was arrested in Kenya and they were complicit in allowing him to be interrogated with the means of interrogation that the Kenyans chose. Questions are to be asked about why they allowed the Kenyans to torture a British citizen.
The Kenyan police denied torture, and it's understood they requested intelligence on Adebolajo from the UK authorities, who said they held no information on him. Adebolajo's lawyer believes British diplomats were instrumental in what happened next.
I think he was taken to Nairobi after the British High Commission had cleared him and he was deported. He never came back to court, he just vanished, and the next thing was in the UK. This is a very, very unique case. It's like somebody was in a hurry to remove him from Kenya.
We asked the Foreign Office to respond to allegations that Adebolajo was tortured in Kenya and that Britain was behind his deportation, but they told us that they couldn't comment on individual cases. Jeremiah suspects that the security services wanted his brother back in the UK so they could recruit him as an informant.
They began to harass him. They kept on calling him. They kept on asking him to meet. They kept on going to his house. He's got a family, he's a family man. They were putting a lot of pressure, really disrupting his life for him to cooperate with them in one way or another.
Jeremiah was approached by MI5 about his brother.
I think at this point they were frustrated. They weren't able to keep tabs on everywhere my brother went. They certainly don't have the resources to watch him 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I said to them, you're wasting your time in bothering me, you're wasting your time in bothering my brother. And they obviously didn't take the hint.
When was the last time that you were aware that they were still in contact with him?
I'd say about a few months before.
So a few months before Woolwich, they were still in contact in some manner with him?
I believe so, yeah.
There's currently a parliamentary inquiry into how a man who had regular contact with MI5 was not prevented from killing Lee Rigby. And it will also examine whether the attempts to recruit Adebolajo played any part in his motive for the attack.
Here is a young man who has been systematically disenfranchised with UK society. whether it's foreign policy, whether it's the program of harassment against him, every experience that he has had within his modern history in relation to the UK government, in relation to the Western world, has only taught him one thing, that there is no place for a young Muslim man to care about his religion, not only in the UK but around the world, because as soon as you start doing that, you become a target for the agencies.
This tactic of recruiting informants within the Muslim community was designed to address the intelligence gaps highlighted by the London bombings. I went to see a man who, like Adebolajo, says he was harassed by MI5. Ali claims it's his charity work with Syrian refugees in Turkey that brought him to MI5's attention. He says they offered him money to spy on his friends and colleagues. He has asked us not to show his face.
They'd pay me a proper salary, and all I had to do is just go to the mosque, just live in the community just the way I'm doing now, and just keep an eye out for people who all of a sudden they just become really reclusive, and that's like signs of somebody doing something dodgy. I said, no, just do exactly what you're doing right now, and we'll just put you on the payroll. I said, I'm not interested.
But after refusing to help, Ali says he tried to travel back to Turkey. This time he was detained at Istanbul airport and told he was now on a list that barred his entry. Back in the UK, he was contacted by MI5 and told he could travel freely again if he agreed to help.
If you'd be willing to work with us, first of all, you'd have to prove yourself in England. And if you thought, you're on our side, then we'd want you to go out to Turkey or eventually Syria and live amongst the people over there and just relay information back to us.
The experience has left Ali angry.
I've never been charged with anything. The MI5 have taken away my liberties and they're trying to sell them back to me by working for them. I feel depressed, and now I'm always looking over my shoulder, because I'm not sure who's really my friend and who might be passing on information to the security services.
There is a fear that this policy is stifling debate and further marginalising some young Muslims.
If people didn't feel isolation and fear of being watched, I think there would have been open discussion. And then these extremists and young people who are radicalized, they could have come to the mosque and they could have actually talked to the community leaders who could have given them the explanation and also got them engaged into mainstream society.
The security services have to penetrate the Islamic community in which Islamist extremists in the UK operate. That's not very easy to do. In fact, it's probably one of the most difficult intelligence targets that the security services have ever had in this country. There undoubtedly have been a great deal of successes in recruiting informants within those communities. It's a terrible situation to be in, where we've got to try and turn people maybe against what they consider to be their own communities in order to gain intelligence. But there isn't too much option in that.
The concern amongst Britain's Muslims is that the government's response to September the 11th has simply created more of what they tried to destroy.
I suggest that it won't be the last, simply because of the tactics of the British Secret Service and foreign policy. It goes back to the statement, for every violent action is a violent reaction.
It's an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. By Allah, we swear by the...
Foreign policy has not helped, and it certainly perhaps even in a way made it easier for the radicalization process. So, we need to have some discussions, with the government to say, look, if you're sincere about ensuring that this process doesn't escalate, then you need to start looking at how we're behaving.
This government has failed to meet any of its wishes regarding, assisting the Muslim community in terms of engaging with it, in terms of making it feel less disenfranchised. In fact, it's only ever increased because the counter-terrorism policies they keep on coming up with make the Muslim community feel that way.